Ronnie, how'd you meet John Cox?
Yeah, I had a real strange meeting with John Cox, and I think a lot of people had strange meetings with John Cox. But Hollis Tucker called me up. We were building the second building out at for the Suncoast Foundation, and he called me up early the next morning. I could tell he had a pretty bad hangover. And he said, I met a guy last night at the Marina Jack, and the guy's going to do all the block work on this new building. He said, I want you to meet me out, get over there right away, because I was going to meet him at 9 o'clock. So we get over there to the building, and they have the slab done, but there's no blocks or anything. And Hollis had said, he's going to do all the block work. And I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be something, 12,000 square foot building. And we get there.
You mean donate them?
Yeah,
Donate them?
Yeah, and so he gets there, and Hollis introduced me to John and everything. And I see John looking around, and he says, by the way, he said, how big is this building? And I said, 12,000 feet. He said, 12,000 feet, and he looked at Tucker, and well, it didn't seem like that last night, And so anyway, make a long story short, well, he said, I guess we'll better get to work on it. He said, that's a pretty good sized building. He was kind of in a hurry, at the time for something, and he shook my hand and said, well, we'll get back at it, we'll get at it. And then he said, so Hollis said, well, when you go get started? And he said, oh, we'll get going tomorrow. And so he walked off, and I turned around to Tucker, and I said, Tucker, this is another one of these deals of yours. I said, at the bar, I'm sure, at the Marina Jack. And I said, that's the last time I'll ever see that guy. I said, he's on the road. And but so the next morning, Hollis said, well, he'll be there. Next morning, we'll go out there, and here comes the trucks in, blocks, labor, and 12,000 square foot building, poured all the lintels and everything. I'm talking about big dollars,
You think about it, though, but that was typical John Cox.
Yeah.
He made the commitment. He was not going to back off ever. He just would not back off, and might not have known what he made the commitment to at the time, as we all have had a drink or two with John over the years. There were a lot of commitments that were made, but that was John Cox. So he said he was going to do it.
I guarantee it was a $100,000 job, and that was it. That was the end of it. And the same way with with the Special Olympics deal down in Venice. If it hadn't been for him and Pete here and some of the guys like that, they never got that. And the land down there for both the Child Development Center building and also the Special Olympics and the track for Special Olympics. John negotiated all of that land with the county for us, or we'd have never had the land. He's he's the most unusual person I ever met about just doing things. And it always for the good, especially for handicapped children.
And none of it was for his own
Not at all.
No.
self-promotion. He didn't care about that. When I first met John, he had just landed at that time. What was going to be his largest job was the Vinyl Tech building, which PET. And I had never done an electrical job that big. And we sat down, and he was the first guy that I felt was 100% honest with me. And he said, let's work on this thing together. And he said, if you help us design it, he said, I promise you, you'll get last look. Well, some of us subcontractors know that the last look is not necessarily the last look with some of these contractors. And I'll never forget, when we got done, we bid the job, and John called me up, and he said, you're a little high, come over to my office, let's sit down and figure the deal out. And literally laid the whole thing out. It was the true last look, okay? He said, no, you engineered it, you're gonna do it. And the job was close to $1 million. We had never done a job that big, and we certainly couldn't bond it and the rest of it. And John says, you gonna start it and finish it? I said, we'll start it and finish it. He said, that's good enough for me. And after that, it was just good enough for him. And your word was your bond, and John's word was certainly his bond. Usual guy.
I saw John shortly after you and Hollis met with him that day, Ronnie, and he was about to faint. Hollis hadn't told him it was a 12,000 square foot building.
Probably told him 1,200.
But he was relatively new in town and really wanted to develop rapport with guys like you, who he had known by reputation. And so once he committed to it, as he did throughout his life, he stuck to his word.
I was introduced to John Cox by my insurance agent, a mutual friend of all of ours, Jack Nicholas, and that was in 1984. And he says, I think, Jack Nicholas said, I think he'd like this fella. He's going to take over and he's purchasing half-acre construction. I go, okay. And he was right. We became really good friends and did a lot of business together over the years, and it was a great relationship. I miss him dearly. We talked earlier about how he had, he loved his family, but he loved his animals.
Oh man, he loved his dogs.
Show horses, his dogs. He took his dogs everywhere, and they were in the office. They were. He was a great guy, but he also loved politics, and he was one of the ones, besides this guy next to me, Ronnie, got me involved in politics and fundraisers and everything, and giving back to the community. And I remember a time he even considered getting in politics himself, and he wanted to run for county commissioner. You remember that?
I remember when he wanted to run for county commissioner.
Yeah, I said, I think that was Ronnie's doings. I finally talked him out of it.
The other way around.
Was it the other way around?
John called me one morning about 8 o'clock, and he said, I want to ask your advice about something. I said, what's that? And he said, I'm going to run for county commission. And I was sitting there drinking a cup of coffee, and I almost dropped it. And I said, John, you're out of your mind. I mean, really out of your mind. I said, you're a developer, a contractor. And I said, what do you think the newspaper is going to do with you?
Well, that was a lesson he learned.
I guess that was a mistake. Oh, Mike.
Oh, I got to tell you, they will skin you for it. Well, I got to tell you, obviously John, and in fact, there's pretty much everybody at this table, were real early supporters of me when I decided to get involved with politics. But I'll never forget when I told John that I was going to do it. Yeah. And he kidded around. He said, if you think you're going to get a change order for talking to the shrink, you're wrong. He said, but he says, I might pay for it out of my pocket. He said, what the hell are you thinking? And I really believed it, and he believed in me. And he was just one of those early, strong, and often supporters. He loved the political thing, but he also realized that he was never going to be able to run. He wanted to, I think. But, when he and Cam moved in next door to us out here in Hawks Harbor, it was just really wonderful because you could get into some interesting conversations in the front yard or on the boat dock, or he'd come over, and just an interesting guy. But you talked about his dogs. Everywhere he went, those were the dogs. Springer Spaniels in his office, dog hair everywhere in his car. I mean, you'd get in there with a sport coat on, you'd come out, you'd be brushing dog hair off for a half hour. It didn't matter. His dog was everywhere. And his horses. He
loved those show horses.
What about that big one he had that slobbered all over
that thing slobbered all over everybody. That thing was disgusting.
And Jack ended up with that dog.
Yeah, I think Jack got that dog,
That's correct.
When we went down to his place at Yosemite one time, and
we went with you.
Yeah, and we hadn't met the dog, and I walked in, and he sat down, and
the dog was as tall as we
walks
were.
over like that, and he walks over and he just lays his head in my lap like that, and I look down and my pants were just soaking wet. And I go like this.
You better not mess with John's dog.
I started pushing the dog away, and John said, "Oh, he's okay." He said that he's friendly. And I said, "Yeah, but what about the rest of this stuff that goes with it?"
He learned the lesson you taught him when he thought about running for county commission, because after that, he took a decidedly low-profile approach as he became more and more charitable and more and more interested in helping the community.
Right.
He was less and less interested in knowing and having people know about it. I'm going to use the expression that Paul Newman used. He was not a believer in phony philanthropy.
No.
But he was very philanthropic. Most people don't appreciate how much he gave, both of his person and of his resources.
Yeah, when they named the street down in Venice after him, both for his help in getting the land and everything, both for the Special Olympics, but also for the new YMCA. He was the one that got the land for the YMCA. Nobody knows that. And they named that street. And we had to figure out a way to get him down there, and he wasn't really very well then either,
Yep.
And he got up there and reluctantly after they named it, and you know, it is on the way. It's just that way, just like
It was John Cox way.
Yeah, he just said, well,
He liked getting his way.
But he managed to pull together the political connections he had developed over the years. Chuck Laskowski, who runs the Water Navigational District, I remember when John and I started negotiating for the land, told John, you need an act of Congress for this land to become available for the use you want.
Right.
And lo and behold, 4 or 5 years later, without an act of Congress, he got the land for Special Olympics, for the Child Development Center, for the YMCA, in perpetuity. So,
John was tenacious.
Yes.
He was tenacious. He did not give up.
But he had a light side too, guys. He had a light side.
Yeah, but how about the time while we're still in politics? Ronnie and I are at a fundraiser. And of course, if it's always the three of us, Ronnie, Donnie, and John. And so I asked him, I said, well, what's new? And he says, well, I might have just poured gasoline on myself today. I go, what? He says, yeah. He says, I guess I'm the force behind trying to separate the EDC from the chamber. Mm-hmm. I go, oh my gosh, John, what are you trying to do there? And he says, well, we need to do it, and it's the right thing to do. And he says, but it looks like the chamber's got the match, and I've soaked myself with gasoline. So every time he called me, I'd say, well, are you on fire yet? But he got it done, and it was the best for both. Chamber it's been better for them since, and EDC is separate. And
A lot of things that he did. That
Yeah,
people
he
just
was a
don't aware of.
sports fanatic. I mean, he had 20 some odd season tickets, plus part of a skybox for the Bucks. He would fly to back home to Ohio to go to
Xavier.
basketball games for Xavier, where he'd sit on the sidelines with the president. And he was an avid Ohio State football fan.
And I think we've all been burnt by the president of Xavier.
The anonymous president.
Anonymously, you're sitting there and you're drinking and you're telling jokes, and some of them are pretty off color.
And John's kind of sitting
John's
over there with
he's
that
not
smirk.
saying a word, and you're sitting there drinking this fine scotch.
And we don't know who this guy is.
And after about every cuss word you can think of and some kind of a dirty joke, you go, oh, and what do you do? He's, well, I'm the president of Xavier.
And you kind of picture wild. You think,
Yeah.
wait a minute, that's a Jesuit priest.
Pleasure to meet you, Father. he had
And there was John over there with that smirk. You know?
He'd have a smirk, and then after it would come out, he'd have a burst, a burst of laughter.
He loved getting us. He loved getting us.
Talking of getting us, he and I went over to the Bahamas once. He asked me to help him bring his boat back, and we got there early enough in the day, and it was a beautiful day. We decided we'd go snorkeling, so we took his boat out offshore Green Turtle Cay, and this is before John had some surgery that let him lose some weight. So he was a pretty big fella, and I'm no slouch either. We're in there snorkeling away, having a good time, and then it's time to go, so it's time to get back on his boat. And John was not physically able to get himself up the ladder. And so there I am, a mile offshore, with a hand on each of his butts, kicking with all my heart with my fins, trying to push him up the back of his boat. And he's laughing hysterically. So I finally get him up onto the swim
Was he even
platform.
helping?
No, he was laughing too hard. He was laughing and wondering where that bottle of 200% alcohol was up on the bridge.
Jack Daniels.
So I finally got him up there, and he said, now you wait right there. So I swam about 10 feet, 15 feet off the side of the starboard side of the boat, and he said, take a look at the bottom. So I went down and took a look at the bottom and came up, and I said, what do you want me to look at? And I heard this clicking noise. I went down and looked some more. And he said, well, my holding tank wasn't working. I wanted you to tell me if when I put the pump on, it would empty. And then he did one of those bursts of laughter.
we went to Donnie and he went to his house, his new house, one year for the Super Bowl. And the Jesuit priest was there, and I can't remember his name.
Mike.
Mike.
But anyway, we were,
And did a service. He did a service.
as it
Came
got later, and as the game went further on, and obviously we were all drinking, including the Jesuit priest, And somewhere during the thing, well, they found out that I wasn't Catholic. Everybody there was Catholic with me. So the priest says,
That was planned, Ronnie.
He says, Mike, he said, the Jesuit priest, he said, well, don't worry about it. He said, I'm going to make you a Catholic right now. And he said, stand up. He goes like this. He said, you're a Catholic.
Now give me your money. Now give me your money.
By the way, that's the other thing that John did. I tell you, talking about giving money to
He gave
the university,
piles of money.
piles of money to
And again,
New College.
nobody would know it.
Yeah.
Xavier.
I think he pledged $1
Austin,
million to New College, if I'm not
Yes, he
mistaken.
did. He did pledge
And,
$1 million in the college.
Xavier, I think he give at least over the years probably a couple $1 million or maybe more than that.
They named a training facility in their athletic department after him.
So it just,
You know, and I'll never forget, we were having a fundraiser at a house when I was running the second time. And typical John Cox, I got to get my mail that night, and he had walked over and put an envelope full of checks. I mean, lots of checks, okay, in my mailbox. He didn't need anybody to say thanks. He didn't need to come over next door and, you know, have you kiss his ring or anything like that. That just wasn't part of it. It was just happy to help you out, low key.
He was a generous guy in a lot of ways. Lou Piotrowski, who now lives in Gainesville and used to live down here with her husband, who was a psychiatrist in town. I called Lou last week to ask her if she had any thoughts about what we were doing here today. She said, well, during one of the fundraisers, there was a lady who was a volunteer whose husband passed away while they were preparing for the event. And the day he passed away, John went to the landlord of the woman, I guess he knew this fellow, and paid a couple of months' rent in advance because he knew that this family was in need. Didn't tell anybody, didn't want, the only reason Lou knew is this volunteer was stunned at the generosity. He was a good guy.
But look
We'll
at some
miss
of
him.
his employees the same way. I mean, what was the Spanish fellow that worked for him?
The Mexican fellow,
The
yeah.
Mexican fellow.
With him 20-some odd years.
20-some years when they
Lived
found
out the ranch.
Yeah, he lived
I'm
at the
not-
ranch,
yeah.
and he was always there. And when he was going to be deported, I mean, John just going to the wall to
Oh,
try
yeah.
to make this happen and make a change, just to take care of somebody. It wasn't just, quote, an employee. This guy was his friend, and I think his friends went all the way from, if you will, the illegal immigrant to the president of Xavier University. He didn't sort his friendship by wallet size or anything else or what they could do for him. His friends were his friends.
Yeah.
Unique guy.
I went to the Super Bowl in San Diego when the Bucks played with John. And John's sister works for the CIA, and he had previously asked that she buy a couple of polo shirts that had the CIA logo on them, and he brought them with him to San Diego. And tickets he thought he had arranged for the game fell through, and so we had to scalp tickets out there. And the scalpers were set up in the Radisson Grand Ballroom with probably 1,000 people waiting in line to buy tickets. And John didn't want to have to wait. We had a cab running with the meter going outside. So he came back to the car and changed shirts real fast and walked in with a CIA shirt, went up to the front desk, pointed at the label, and said to the guy in charge, "I can't wait." And the fellow brought his tickets. John gave me cash and walked out the door.
That was John.
He was a class act.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
I'll tell you guys, he was a great neighbor. Had him a long time. He and Cam were just, and Cam's still there, just wonderful, wonderful neighbors. And she walks the dog every morning. And though
Cam-
she loves that dog.
Cam and Blythe are
Yep.
best friends.
Just
John used to
wonderful
call
people.
me and warn me, says, the wives are going shopping, be prepared.
John was like Mike in some respects. Mike will tell you that he's not an electrician. He might be a contractor, but he's not an electrician. John was a contractor, but he wasn't a
Wasn't a
construction
builder.
expert. He had a degree in accounting. And he understood a lot of fairly sophisticated financial attributes, more than many contractors. Interesting juxtaposition. But he loved playing the role of a contractor because he never
he
did.
loved it.
Until the very end, he rarely dressed up. John usually dressed down. If you looked down and you saw a pair of scruffy boots, the odds are pretty good it was going to be John.
just left the stables.
That's right. Yeah. Most people don't realize John raised show horses and would go out to Oklahoma a couple of times a year and regularly won first place and had his home with just, I don't know how many trophies he had. It was incredible.
Oh, yeah.
But he loved his horses.
He was just a great friend to everybody, and he like you say, he never took anything. But the biggest thing I think in his whole life was Special Olympics and Suncoast Foundation and handicapped kids. I mean, that's what I mean. You just mentioned that, and his eyes would light up, and he'd be there. and he was always there with the money and everything. What do you need? What do you need? And you know, he was the kind of guy that things like that. It didn't matter what you asked for. I was afraid to ask John sometimes for things because I knew that he would just automatically do it.
Just do it.
And you know, I mean, if I walked into it and say, "Look, John, you know, just like that block deal, you know, we need some blocks." I think that kind of threw him a little off guard that day. But anything is that you could say. So a lot of times we didn't ask John because I knew he shouldn't be doing it. But if you said to him, "Look, we need $30,000 for this building," next morning you'd have a check, you know, in the mail. You know, I mean, that's just the way it was. If it was
You know, it's
for the kid.
interesting because he's done a wonderful job too. You look at his son Jack. He has instituted in him that same type of community, that same sense
Right.
of community and giving back. And it's interesting to watch.
We're best
Jack,
friends with Jack now.
Yeah, and watching Jack materialize and grow into his father's position. I mean,
We went out to dinner, remember, at the El Adobe restaurant with John, and everybody went. I think Mike was out of town, and Jack didn't know anything was up that night, and Andrea was there, and this was years ago, and that's when he made Jack a full partner and president of the company, and turned the reins over to him.
Yeah, Jack plays golf with Dottie and all of us every week now, and you know, he's a different individual, but he's got a lot of the same traits his dad had, and I think as he gets older, he'll be more and more so. But he, you know, Jack's a great guy, and not only Jack, but his other sons, both of them are Chris
And James.
Yeah, they're the same way. You know, he was a disciplinarian. There's no question about that.
He was tougher on his kids than anyone else was.
He was,
Yeah.
and he
He loved them.
But
But he lived vicariously through them to some degree. You probably had the same experience I did. I remember going to a tailgate party at a Buccaneer game with John. This is way back before Jack knew Andrea. And Jack was seeing 2 or 3 different young ladies at the same time, unbeknownst to each of them. And
Sorry, Andrea.
And they all showed up. They all showed up for that Buck game.
Andrea, you were in the mix. Son. You were in the mix.
They all showed up for that Buck game, and I remember Jack on cell phones back and forth with people giving him a heads up, so-and-so's coming over now.
Oh, boy.
And he would get rid of one young lady and another would show up. And his dad was over here just reveling in it. So that's my boy.
He loved it, didn't he? He had that smirk again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played golf with Jack yesterday afternoon, and me and him were riding together, and he said, "You're going to go down and talk about my dad tomorrow morning, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Keep me out of that. Keep me out of that."
Now, John Cox was a great citizen for the Sarasota area, just fantastic.
I miss getting that 302-8159 number. Gosh.
You know, it's interesting. I still have his cell number
I do
on my
too.
phone. I've never been able to erase it yet.
Yeah.
Do you remember after Charlie Crisp was elected governor, how proud John was to have his cell phone number? I'm sure he told everybody,
yeah.
"Oh, I got Charlie's cell phone number."
Yeah, he loved
No,
his politics.
He did. He did.
Well, my relationship with John went back a long time. Back in I guess right after he came to Sarasota, he started dating Cam, and we knew Cam through mutual friends, and so that's how we got to know John. He lived on Siesta Key, started playing tennis, and you know, a friendship came to be one of a friendship plus a professional relationship. I represented John for a long time, and political friend, business friend, a lot of interesting relationships with John over the years.
Absolutely. We have so many memories of John. One of my favorite ones, of course, one of the first times I met John, our Boys and Girls Club office was on 6th Street at that time. And he came in as I knew of John, of course, and knew of his activities in the community and his involvement with Special Olympics. But really the first time I got to meet John, and he was such a big, imposing man, and I was a little bit intimidated, but John set me at ease right away and began talking about ways that the Boys and Girls Club and maybe Special Olympics could coordinate together and work together for the kids. And little did I realize that John probably knew all this, but a few years later, of course, our new Robert and Joan Lee Club is located right next to the Special Olympics. And John was such an important part of that, and Jim knows this well as we were going through the process, and it's on government property, and there are several different government entities, and it was taking a long time to get all the leases signed and all that, and there were some obstacles, there were some legitimate obstacles, and I'll never forget, I was like so worried, where we decided this was the best place for this club. It really needed to be in Ronnie Foxworthy Park. That's where we could serve the most children. And John was convinced of that as well. But it looked like maybe we might have to find another parcel. And of course, we had no funding for that. But John told me one time, he said, I'll tell you, I'll make you a promise. If for whatever reason we can't locate this club in Ronnie Foxworthy Park, I will personally find a piece of land that you can build that club on. And from that day forward, I knew John's word was as good as his bond. I never lost another wink of sleep over where the club was going to be located. But true to his word, John came through, and we're so honored now to have that club in a partnership with the county and certainly Special Olympics. But it was really refreshing to hear John say that you have enough to worry about it, don't worry about it. If this doesn't work, I will take the responsibility, because those kids need a place where they can come to their club.
I don't know how you all felt, but John was such a bear of a guy, and you mentioned, Mac, an imposing presence, but a strong intellect and a lot of vision, and could see the big picture. But what was always very, I guess, on the one hand frustrating about him, but also at the same time something you admired, was he never wanted to be out in front of anything. I mean, he didn't want credit for anything. He just wanted to be there, make it happen, make sure it worked. He put his personal commitment behind it to make sure it would always work. And as a result, he just got tons of stuff done, but in a quiet, unassuming way that I don't think most people really appreciate.
Well, that was one of the unique things about John, was his ability to, and perhaps because he didn't really seek to get a lot of recognition, but John was able to navigate the fields of business, the not-for-profit world, and the government world, and facilitate things to happen that was, I think, really unique in the community. I mean, you look around at the things that John helped make happen, and the list is a long one.
It is.
A big heart and a giver.
A big heart and a giver.
It's rather strange that I was at a number of community meetings in the 70s, and I'd see this man here, and he'd be rather quiet, make a statement now and then, and I often wondered who he was. And it was a long time before I connected his business name and his personal name. He kind of hid out on me. And once I found out who he was, and he was a general contractor, the next time we had need for some type of building, I called him. And really I got the surprise of my life, because I never expected a businessman to work the way he did. He usually, if someone comes to you in that field, you expect them to look over the project, come up with some type of a price for you after time, and just always on a business basis. What impressed me is that he wanted to know what the mission of the organization was, what we were doing. He didn't seem like he was interested in the finance angle at all. It was strictly, I want to do something that'll serve your people. I want to put together something that'll work for you. And that really impressed me, and that continued for years as we moved from project to project. And I guess, you have to be a bit careful when you have people dealing especially with nonprofits or religious organizations. I think some of them are on the defensive, and that's rightly so. They maybe should be. But he never worried about, what his part was going to be in it financially. It was to do the best thing for the organization.
You're right. That ties into exactly what you said, Brother Geenan, and Jim, and not really wanting to take the credit. And I remember so vividly the day that the Special Olympics dedicated their entranceway to the Special Olympics and the Boys and Girls Club is John Cox Way, and I think they had to tell him, you know, a little white filled that it was for somebody else, and they covered the sign up, and the only way they could get John was there was say we're going to name it after somebody else. But I'll never forget the look on his face when he found out it was going to be called John Cox Way. It was a great tribute to John, but it was again something he didn't seek. But I'm so glad that he was able to be recognized, and Cam and Jack and his family were there that day, and I know it means a lot to them.
Well, he never asked for anything, but he never forgot a favor, and when he called the favor, it was always for something for the greater good, not for himself. And, you know, he just sucked you in that way. I mean, you were going to be part of the bigger team, and if he was invested in it, you were going to be invested in it one way or another. And that's sort of a rare quality on the business side of things. It wasn't focused just on his business, but I think he understood, and he said it to me a couple times, if the community's healthy, his business will be healthy.
When you're in a project, you know, you start a project, and in any type of nonprofit, you're fundraising in the same time. There is this unknown valley between start and finish, and to have a person like that who is engaged with you, to walk with you through that valley, that's quite an assist, and it's quite a comfort.
A couple of years ago, we had a surprise birthday party for him. He was so he was not self-aware. He was unassuming. Cam knew he'd never get him to this birthday party if she knew it was going to be a surprise birthday party. And so, of course, you got to invite hundreds of people. John knew everybody, and where are you going to park cars and the like? So ultimately, Cam had to give up the sham a little bit, but I still can see his face coming through that door, the surprise, just the joy of it all. And, you know, on the one hand, he knew it was making him uncomfortable because he just didn't like it, but he was such a gregarious person, being around people. And I just watched him, and, you know, that'll always be an enduring memory of my mind, watching him walk through the living room and our family room and kitchen, just talking to people, and people just expressing their admiration and their appreciation for him. I know it made him uncomfortable, and that was the best part about it. It made him uncomfortable.
Well, Jim, maybe the reason that he was uncomfortable is he knew he was going to get roasted.
Well, that could have been.
Which he did.
Yes, he did.
And one of the things about John was Brother Geenan, I mean, he may have talked about the big picture and missions and stuff, but the numbers were always in John's head. He had a really great mind for the conceptualization of projects, but also for the numbers. And he could cost out something, he could get to the bottom right-hand corner in a nanosecond. And he was just a really good numbers guy. And one of the funny things from that surprise birthday party was John was a Xavier graduate, and he loved Xavier University. And I think over the years, John had maybe elevated his academic standing in the minds of his sons a little bit more than the actual standing. And do you remember that one of the things that somebody dragged out were John's grades, and at one point
I can imagine.
John had a good time in school.
He did. He did. But his grades did not reflect his abilities with numbers and finance. He was a very bright financial guy.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, even coming into my world and some of the complex things he'd grasp, he worked for years on arcane things like impact fees, but he could go through all of the nuances and the interrelationships in a very complex thing and boil it down to something simple.
Yeah.
That was one of my first impressions of him, working with him on a business basis, was, whoa, grasp it like that.
You know, as a friend, I always admired his availability. Yeah, I always feel that if someone really is interested in you, they'll be there for you. And I never recall on any occasion, and I had his personal cell phone number, I would call him, and he would say, I'm in Tallahassee or I'm in Cincinnati, but I'll be back there, you know, tomorrow or the next day and so on, and I'll see you. But he was always available, always available.
And that for as busy as he was and all the interest he had, he wasn't putting you off saying, I have something else more important.
Yeah, no, he was. He just was always there. That's that big-hearted guy that he was. I can remember when Ohio State played Miami for the national championship. I'm going. I mean, off he goes. I said, John, you need a ticket. I'll get one. He calls me from outside the game. I can't get a damn ticket. Duh. So we watched the whole game from, I guess, the bar across the street, which is a replica of the bar across the street from the Horseshoe at Ohio State Stadium. And, but it was important to just be there. It was that gregariousness and being around all of that. And yet you'd sit there with him, and it was always, I don't even know why I buy these tickets. They stink or whatever. I called him the day that the Bucks hired John Gruden. And I said, and I thought he'd be excited. I mean, here's sort of like a scrappy guy, and and he goes, oh, crap. Well, he didn't say crap. He used some expletives here and there, and he said, I just mailed my season tickets. I wonder if I can get them back. I said, well, if you don't want them, I'll take them.
I took John and Jack to a Duke basketball game a few years back, and we had a great time. That's such a great venue for basketball, and John liked basketball. I mean, he had season tickets to Xavier games, and one of the things that John really enjoyed from that was I made the mistake of we had a couple of beers and a hamburger before the game with one of my old roommates who's on the faculty at Duke. And Dick talked about things that I would just as soon not been talked about.
And you did that well in school, too.
Right.
I'm sure they have been embellished over the years.
I think some of the things I'm happy that John took with him when he left us.
I remember he had just gotten his bigger boat, and we went down to Key West with him, and it was the first time he'd taken it on a long journey. And we were going to get up in the morning, we were going to go out and lobster. So I hear him up on the bridge, and beep, beep, won't start. Beep, beep, won't start. He is pissed. Calls up here, they send a mechanic in from Marathon. They have to tear apart the whole cabin to get down into the engines. And just then, we decided to walk away because it was getting a little testy, and we went down and had breakfast. And when we come back, I looked down at the mechanic, I said, how is it going? And he goes, thunk, thunk against the tanks. Both tanks were empty. I mean, we just got in there. So the guy, apparently there was a little left in the bottom of one of the sumps, and he hand cranked it over to the other one and said, I think I got it fixed now, but you may want to take it over and fuel it up. You're a little low. So we're standing by the pump, and John said, I was out of gas, or I was out of fuel, wasn't I? Yep.
That's a great story.
Well, that was the thing with John. He liked boats, but he never really learned how to use them very well. I think there were a few groundings in his career. Yeah, right.
I can remember leaving there, and we're coming out the channel, and I'm looking, and I'm seeing the bottom, and I'm seeing the bottom, and I'm seeing the bottom, and all of a sudden, he's got the thing in reverse, backing it up, and followed the wrong channel markers. right up, almost put us on a sandbar there. But boy, I'll tell you what, he could back a boat into a slip 3 sheets to the wind better than anybody I ever saw.
Well, boats
but if he was sober, he couldn't get it back in.
I think boats were sort of like horses for John. He liked the idea of them, and he liked the appearance and so forth. But did you ever see him ride a horse?
No,
I don't think he ever rode one of the things.
True.
I mean, it was.
That is
he liked
true.
to have them.
Yep.
He liked to show them.
That's true. I never did see.
Ride
that is
one?
a really good point.
Yeah.
Why do you have one? I have to show, not to ride.
Well, as we've talked, John was the kind of person who, if he took something on, he really got into it. He didn't just play around with it. He got into it. And we have such a vital downtown now, it's really sort of hard to remember back when in the, the mid 80s and late 80s, and it was struggling. And the city was trying to find the right formula for getting the, and everybody who was involved in the downtown was trying to figure out how do we get it going. And John and Steve Baseman were on the downtown, I think it was called the Downtown Redevelopment Board, I believe that was the name of it. Don Jakeway was involved in it. And they were very frustrated with the way the city was going. John decided that somebody needed to be on the city commission that understood finance in particular. And he decided to pick on my wife. So he came over, and he and Steve, and they talked to Nora and said, we'd like for you to run for the city commission. And would you consider it? She was flattered that they asked, but was skeptical about it, as Nora is skeptical of a lot of things.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, you hadn't noticed that, had you? Yeah. Tell me the big picture, and I'll tell you what's wrong with it. Yeah. So at any rate, to make a long story short, those two guys, and in particular John, got Nora involved, got her started on her political career. And as I mentioned to Jim, that things have not been the same since then.
For either of us, right?
No, right, for either of us.
John, I think another one of his legacies that maybe not a lot of people knew he had his finger in was the whole recreation of the economic development effort to the Economic Development Corporation that exists today, and the move to, move it out of a strictly chamber presence and out into trying to become more community engaged and be a public-private partnership. And he pushed on me for a year and a half to try and push that conversation. And then finally I figured out to push back on him and make him do something he wasn't comfortable with, and that was gather 30 or 40 people together and talk about it.
Yeah.
But I still remember that meeting. It was done at the Ramada Inn on 41, and it led to what's now the Economic Development Corporation. So he had his finger in a lot of those different types of things. When he saw something needed to be done, get out of the way, and he was going to recruit you. I think that was part of that never forgetting a favor type of thing, too.
Right. Jim, you mentioned pushback against John. Now, that was an interesting experience when you had to push back against John. I mean, it was somewhat akin to pushing back on a wall. But he had several things that he would retort with when you push John. One of the things that he would always bring up with me when I really pushed him on something was his Jesuit education. Did you ever hear that?
Only in portion. I want to hear this.
Well, it was if John didn't think that what you were getting him to do, or telling him he should do, or advising him to do was the right thing, he would go into his Jesuit education. And
yes, I did.
Which was basically a reason why I've made up my mind and I really don't want to listen to anything else. Now, not that that's the essence of a Jesuit education. I'm not slighting Jesuit education.
But it was a great
I'm not
handle.
a Jesuit, as you probably know. I was on the other side with about a few things myself.
How'd that go for you?
Well, I said when Notre Dame plays Xavier, we'll talk about it.